Yeah.
Oh,
So what do you want to do?
well, I was thinking about that last night, and part of it, is there anything that you want to do?
Well, I hadn't thought of it at all.
That's okay. So I guess I had maybe a few thoughts. Um, so I suppose I'll just ask you a question, and I don't mean it insensitively at all,
No.
and I don't think that you are conscious are very sensitive about it. I feel like at this point
Oh,
you're
no.
accepting kind of what's going on. So I was thinking about you last night, and you've lived a very full life. You've lived a pretty long life. You've
Yeah.
been in Lemoyle forever, and I was just kind of wondering as you're looking towards the end right now,
Yeah.
um, maybe if you had any thoughts about the life you lived, about life in general.
Well, I guess, like you say, I've lived in Lemoyle forever. I would never have thought of living anyplace else. I was not one of those that was anxious to get out. And I think to this day that that has been a really good, well, if you want to call it a decision, but that's what I've done is stay close. And I don't mind going places and visiting things, but there comes a time to go home. And my dad was kind of the same way. And he thought of doing other things other places, but in the end, it all came down. He stayed here. And, but you know, the world being what it is right now, this is a pretty good place to be.
Amen.
And the more isolated, the better. Yeah. And most of our family has felt the same way. Yeah, they've all thought about doing different things in different places, but there comes a time to go home. And I remember my nephew when back in the days when he was a pill and he ended up in prison and everything else. And when finally they turned him loose, boy, he was home and he thought that was the only place to be. Yeah. And of course, I've been a Christian, which is no big, I don't know, uh, thing to say on my account, but this this thing about scripture and everything, to me, that is the only way to go. And there's going to be blessing, and I have been altogether. And in the church with our ups and downs and everything else, nevertheless, in the long run, that has been the way to go to me. And it's not that I'm so perfect, it's because I'm not perfect. And I have said to people that if I'm there on Sunday morning, it's not because I deserve to be, it's because we need to be,
Yeah.
you know, that type of thing. So that has been kind of a, and some of the folks have been just great.
Mm.
And now this here, and I just can't describe all the things that they've done and tried to do, and all the encouragements and the prayers and the visits and the cards and everything. And there's 4 churches here that have been doing that same thing.
Yeah.
I got one from the Baptist church Sunday night. Their Sunday school made the card
Mm.
with all their prayers and everything on it. And I thought, I read that and made me cry.
Uh-huh.
They're Sunday school kids,
Right.
you know. And well, I've never been a member of that group, but there's a lot of them you're friends with, you know.
Sure.
But
So maybe there's hope for the next generation there.
yeah, every so often I get to thinking about all the places I've been and things I've gotten to do, which is above and beyond anything I ever would have expected, and people that I've met that have been turning points in my life, and a couple of them are right in those pictures there.
Yep.
I never would have guessed some of the things that I've done and places I've been because of those people. And some of the things they've done back, oh boy, they've been really great. One of them is in California, the other one is in Washington State, and always has been, the center one, from Washington State. And I met him by accident, Chuck Lyons. He's a steam person. Yeah. So that has been another one.
Yeah.
The steam power
Yep. You've been
clubs
into that a
and
long
things.
time.
They have been just great, you know. Yeah. There's all these people like yourselves who come around and encourage and things like that. And so, you know, I feel really blessed in that way. As Susie would say, only in Moille. Well, there are other places too, but people do the same thing, where people know each other. In a city, a big town, you can't do that because it's not possible for everybody to know everybody else, you know.
Yep.
But yeah, I don't know if you have any questions or.
No, I don't know. I was just, it's all off the cuff. I suppose maybe if I had a question, what do you think the worst moment in your life was?
The worst moment?
If you want to share it. Yeah.
There's been a couple of them.
Yeah.
One of them was when we lost our brother back in 1958. And it was a week after he was married. And he was going to live out in the brick house. They're putting up a TV antenna. And they lost control of the antenna when they're raising it, and it touched the power line. And he was put down unconscious. And of course, never woke up. And yeah, that was not one of our better days.
Sure.
As anybody who has had to go through that, they know. And my grandfather said that same night, he said, now we know how other people feel when we hear about these things.
Amen.
And I never forgot that.
Yeah. It's not just a news article.
And you sure do. Boy, you identify with that. And yeah. In another one, I made the mistake of adopting this Hispanic kid. You know about him, Sergio.
Yeah.
Well, of course, they all have to get up and go. And he joined the Air Force. That was not a good day.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
I bet.
And he was in the Air Force for 4 years. But he came back here to live and to finish out his schooling, nursing course down at IVCC. And of course, then he had met a girl when he was in the service. And he was stationed at Travis Air Force Base in California. And he and some of the guys on the base, they went to a Baptist church off base where there were families, you know. Well, he met this girl, and eventually, boy, they became engaged. And when he was stationed in England, he went over to Amsterdam to get a ring. Wow. But yeah, that was not a good experience, and I didn't breathe easily until he got home again.
It's hard to watch him go, not knowing what the future held for him.
Oh, boy. I thought we'd never see him again,
Yeah.
see. So that was another very low point. And I'm sure other people can identify with things like that too. Because I've known, there was one family here in Moille, he was their only son, he went into the Army. It just shattered them that he was no longer with him. He came back, of course, when he had served his term. But yeah, that. So I thought of them too, and I thought, oh boy,
Yeah.
no.
Right.
But the neighborhood threshing crew was something when I was a kid. And all this steam power thing began across the field here about half a mile there at Denny Faber's.
Okay.
And in 1943, of course, I was 7 years old at the time. But our threshing crew here in Moille that Dad was a part of was the last steam powered threshing rig in the Bureau County, and it went a long time like that. And Edith Bauer told me one time, she says, the Green River threshing run, when they would fire up to go threshing, was an institution. I wasn't aware of that. We took it for granted, you know. But that stuck, and that has just led to more stuff, including Chuck Lyons in the center picture, who was a steam power fanatic.
Right.
And that's how we happened to strike up the conversation in Mendota by accident, which led to trips back and forth across the country, and oh my gosh, flying and driving and train and everything else, yeah. So that turned into something I never would have guessed that day when we happened to cross paths.
Sure.
Yeah. So there has been some really great people. And I don't know, you know Joe Lindenmeyer?
The name rings a bell. I probably
Arlington is where they lived. They lived in Cherry when he was growing up, he and his folks, steam power people.
Okay.
And I got acquainted with them because of that. And which led to just a whole bunch of things. They were great friends, Lester and Doris Lindenmeyer. Well, we've lost them now too. They're gone. Yeah. But
what do you suppose are or have been maybe the happiest points in your life, or the best times in your life?
Usually when I was sitting on the back of a steam engine.
Fair enough.
And there are incidents, just like Sunday night. I almost didn't go, but I'm sure glad I got to be there. And
a whole bunch of other people were glad you got to be there too.
Well, I hope so. There's a lot of people who put up with a lot of stuff from me. I think back on that drummer, that was not a good scene. But here they are, they're back again.
Yeah.
They should have given me a smack or two.
So you haven't been perfect your whole life?
Pardon?
You haven't been perfect your whole life?
Oh boy, there are things that I would be too embarrassed to have you know about.
And share whatever you like.
But the Lord knows about it, and when he took a load of sin on himself, he took a load, now let me tell you. Yeah. And I believe that, I really do. Yeah. And as far as life itself is concerned, this life may come to a close, but there's a whole lot more ahead.
Yeah.
Resurrection. Yeah. And everlasting life. And everything shows design and function and purpose in fine point and detail. That means that our very existence here is not without purpose, right, and direction. Yeah.
So with that, and maybe this is a hard question to answer, maybe not. Just a purpose. Have you thought about, now that you're here, as to what your purpose in life has been here on earth? Do you have any inkling as to why you've been put here at this moment in time, and what you were supposed to do and what you did? What was your purpose in life?
Well, that's I never really thought of it that way. But I guess maybe the Lord puts us here for a purpose regardless, even if you don't know what it is. He's
Sure.
got a purpose.
Sure.
Hopefully it's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
But and all the people I've gotten to know just having been here, yourselves being some of them. Yeah. And your mother is a gem.
Agreed.
Yeah. I really, really enjoy her. And when she can be outspoken, she is outspoken.
Mm-hmm.
And she's a Bible believing Christian and makes no bones about it. I
No.
like that.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe what advice would you give to the people you're leaving behind? Maybe especially the younger ones with a lot of life left in them yet. What advice would you give those people as to spending their time here on earth?
First, don't go away from the Lord. Stay close. And you may have your ups and downs in that, but nevertheless, in the long run, that's going to be you know, the deciding factor for good things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any mistakes you made along the way that you'd like to say, hey, don't do this like I did it?
There's a number of them. Like I said, I would just soon you didn't know about them. I'd be too embarrassed.
That's okay. We won't prod too hard.
Yeah.
Anything you think you did right, besides being a Christian and walking with the Lord, anything else on earth that you're like, hey, if I was going to do this again, I'd do this same thing again.
Staying in Lemoyle.
Amen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I enjoy knowing people who have made the same decisions from generation to generation.
Yeah.
And some of them, we've talked. When I was in school, I hated school. And I did not want to be there. And I did not do my schoolwork. My folks and my teachers were ready to wring my neck, and with good reason. But I just didn't want to be there. And of course, I went to school my whole 12 years almost, the Allen School. I hated that place with a purple passion. And me and one of my little buddies sat at the north end of that square early one morning before the last bell rang and we had to go in. And I remember he said, I'd like to see that steeple clear those trees by about 400 feet. But, and now I look back on it, and that was a unique experience in spite of myself.
Yeah.
And I kind of got into the preservation thing and local history. I would not have gone back on that for anything. Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah. Overall, that's one of the decisions I wouldn't have changed for anything.
Sure.
Yeah.
Best childhood memory.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have a best childhood memory?
Oh, childhood memory? Well, my grandparents, when they ran the funeral home down there, we just loved staying there. And we go in for a weekend, maybe Friday and Saturday night, and go home on Sunday. And we just thought that was the place to be in when they had nothing going on there. And my grandparents went over and above and beyond the call of duty for all the things that they did, things I didn't half appreciate. And now I look back on that, I thought, you little scamp, you took that for granted, And my folks the same way, the things they went out of their way to do. And so, yeah, that was really one of the high points.
he really enjoyed staying
All our
over
little
there.
buddies would come flocking over there, and we'd work in Grandpa's woodworking shop downstairs and make a mess. Yeah, but he never said a word. I guess he just liked having us there, you know.
Yeah.
But I think back, how many generations have your people been here?
Yeah.
Quite a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ours now, with Susie's grandchildren and all that, go back to about 7 generations.
Wow.
All of them went to the Allen School.
Yeah.
Can you believe something like
Yeah.
that? That is unheard of.
Right.
And there are other families, the Fabers, Jan Minkler's people, they go back even further than we do, at least the Jan's people do.
Yep.
And, you know, things like that, I think that's unique, and I'm glad we got to, you know. And I guess you'd say I'm not a drifter. I stay in one place, except for a short period, then I'm back again.
Right.
Yeah.
We were thinking about that at the Christmas Eve service, of kind of, at least I was, as you were playing the organ and as the bell was ringing. How many generations of people have come and lived and gone listening to that same organ and that same bell? And
oh my gosh. The church goes back to 1840.
Yep.
One of the original members was Mrs. Mariah Clapp. There were 14 of them. And they signed an agreement or a covenant with all what they committed themselves to.
Yep.
And Mark Beatty's, he is a direct descendant of Mrs. Mariah Clapp. And that goes back 6 or 7 generations.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's quite a few others that have gone a long time, but some of the names have disappeared.
Yeah. Yeah.
From town. I guess that's inevitable.
Sure.
It just happens, you know.
Right.
But
my understanding is you took the dinky out to
the railroad.
Iowa. Yeah. You want to tell us about that little adventure?
Oh, well.
How old were you?
There were two rail movements in town every day. And one was the little passenger train. It was a gas electric single car near the end, but it was 3 or 4 cars way back in my folks' time. Until the automobile.
Yep.
We call that little train the dinky. And there was a lot of back and forth on that. And there was also the way freight that serviced all the lumber yards and the coal yards and everything in every town. From here out to Denrock. Do you know where Denrock is? You go out to Prophetstown, or you come out of the Quad Cities Route 2.
Okay.
It goes right to the edge of Denrock. It's just a bunch of railroads out in the middle of the countryside. Okay. There's no town.
Okay. Just
yeah.
A big rail yard.
And the freight would go out there every week, or every day of the week, from Mendota.
Yep.
And you could buy a ticket if, you know, passenger, they put you in the caboose. And you'd have to wait while they did their yard work in some of the towns and everything. But you'd get there.
Yep.
But they'd go out to the end of the line there, from Mendota to Denrock, turn around and come back.
Okay.
There was a Y there they could back around
Yep.
on.
Yep.
And usually 10 in the morning is when they would come into town. And they'd get back maybe 4 or 5, depending on how much work they had to do out on the line. And it was all steam powered. And my grandfather would buy us tickets. $2.07 round trip from Moille to Denrock and back. And I suspect that they hated to see us come. We were junior high kids. silly as kids are, and they'd park us up in the cupola of the caboose to keep us out of their way. Oh boy, that was the place to be, and we'd ride up there all afternoon, all the way out. And those were real experiences, and we were pilled some of the time, but they never got on us.
Yeah.
Just, they were always so accommodating. They go out of their way, the guys that work that line,
Sure.
And back to Mendota they'd go, and there was a roundhouse at Mendota,
Okay.
out by Ziggy's restaurant.
Yep.
Yeah, and we'd, as kids, would bicycle out to that roundhouse. They had 5 or 6 stalls in it. Maybe they'd be full of engines, depending, because they had several runs out of Mendota, all steam powered. Oh, we thought that was just the place to be. And they'd let us walk around in there. They never told us to get lost. Now they would.
Mm.
But back then, as long as we didn't touch anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So those were great experiences. And my granddad was always careful to make sure that we got to do some of those things.
Right.
Yeah. 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 So.
Now it sounds like a good memory. Do you ever regret not getting married?
No, I'm not against it. And if there's going to be a relationship, I believe that that's the only right one.
Yeah.
But I never wanted to be myself. I like this independence coming and going. I felt that there were some things I got to do I wouldn't have gotten to do, because resources are limited,
Right. Right.
And but I was always happy for everybody else that got married. I always hope they live happily ever after. Got one coming up here. Is going to visit me tomorrow from Asheville, North Carolina.
Oh, wow.
Spend the day.
Okay.
I've told you about him before, I think.
Yeah.
One of Paul Butler's interns for broadcasting.
Okay.
Well, he's just getting engaged. He just got her a ring. Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, things like that, I'm really.
Well, that should be a good visit then.
Pardon?
I said that should be a good visit tomorrow. Okay.
Yeah, he'll stay a day. He has stayed with me 2 or 3 days, but this time he can't do it.
Right.
But it's all the way back to Asheville, and he's done this 2 or 3 times. I was like, you came to us from California not knowing a soul here. What is it that makes you want to come back here?
Right.
He loves Moille.
We don't blame him there, right?
Yeah.
So you've been a I would say a keeper of local history a good portion of your life anyway, and that's certainly a big part of how I know you. Are there any Moille stories that maybe are your favorites that you've passed down, that you heard, and now it's something that really sticks with you?
Well, I don't know. Let me see. I'm sure if you give me enough time, I could think of a few.
We've got plenty of time, and you can think of as many as you want.
But I just remember how things were when I was a kid. There's a lot of changes.
Yeah.
One of the things that we really enjoyed, we had 2 marble soda fountains in town. One where the restaurant is, and one where Bob and Ann live now.
Mm-hmm.
And they had malts and shakes and ice cream sundaes, and they had Cokes of several different tastes, and there was chocolate and cherry, and it was with crushed ice. And we'd go in there on a hot day, and you'd get a Coke about like that for 10 cents. With the flavor in, they didn't charge you extra.
Yeah.
Oh, was that good? And for all our growing up years, that was just kind of the place to be.
Yeah.
And Fay Rambo ran the confectionery store, and Duke Hurlis, and well, he had people that came after him, ran the drugstore. It was a pharmacy, Rexall drugstore, and it was open till 10 o'clock at night. Everybody in town would be up there in the summertime, sitting out on the benches, out on the sidewalk. And those things are really fun, to think back on. And I really regret that we don't have that.
And that's something that Bob and Ann carried on for
Yeah.
quite a long time, because I remember that is just their soda fountain as a kid, and
Yeah.
and them adding the flavorings to it. You get a
Oh,
chocolate cherry
yeah.
Coke or a Green River, or
Yeah.
they really carried that on for the kids of Lamoille
Yeah.
for a long time.
Did you ever have one of their lemon sodas?
I don't remember their lemon sodas.
Oh boy, with the ice cream and the fizz water and the lemon flavoring, and oh, was that good stuff on a hot day?
Yeah.
Wow. And my dad had an accident down at the south end of town. The steering mechanism in his truck came apart, and he bounced it off of 2 trees and broke his jaw. Well, he couldn't hardly eat anything because he couldn't, it was wired shut and everything. Well, he was out on the tractor planting corn, and my mother would go to town and get those chocolate malted milks, which were just exquisite, and bring them out to the field to him, and he could drink them through a straw.
That kept him planting.
Yeah.
Huh.
It kept him going like that. I remember that. Yeah. And he'd ride on that tractor with seed corn on the platform in the back, and the dog riding along, planting corn.
Yeah.
Still got that tractor too. It's that one I bring to down to Monroe's.
Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, there have been things that you like to remember, even some of the hard things. There are some good things you'll remember out of them.
Yeah.
And I remember my grandmother, and she'd lived a long time and had been through a lot of things. And when my brother was killed, of course, the house was full of people after the service and everything. And we were all out here, and she says, "It brings love." And then she would say, of course, we didn't realize it at the time, and she would say, "The time will come, as time goes by, this will fade into the background. It will never completely disappear, but other things will come along, kind of pass in front of that. And it gives you that, like I said, you think about other people when you hear about these things, and oh boy, yeah. And there have been some of those things that have happened, as you know. I guess every community goes through that, especially small ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially.
Yeah.
So how did you become interested in local history? Was there anything in your life that sparked that interest, that really kind of got you?
Well, my granddad was into it.
Yeah.
And up in the funeral home, there was a storeroom with all those pictures you've seen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one day I was in there and looking at those pictures, and one thing led to another. You get curious. Well, now, how did this happen, and why are we doing it this way right now? Well, there's always a reason why. And he would tell me stories about the village green out in front of the Allen School. The village owns that. The school doesn't, but they have the use of it. Yeah. And how they used to turn cattle loose, cows. And a lot of people in town had cows for milk for their families, and they'd sell some of it. and they'd turn them out up there. It was fenced in with a wooden rail fence that went all the way around the school and the square. And that's where they'd turn their cows out in the daytime to graze until milking time in the evening. And he said then somebody would open the gate and those cows would spread out all over town, heading for home.
They probably knew exactly where they were going.
Yeah, they knew.
Yep.
And they were going to get fed grain too. But I think I've told you before, it made me think that, if you were a kid in school at that time and you went out to play, you had to watch where you stepped. Yeah. But that's a unique thing. That really is. And,
Yeah.
well, they did that same thing on Boston Common back east.
Yep.
Cows out there, that's how they kept the grass down.
Yeah.
Then the British soldiers camped their redcoat soldiers out there. But Moille was a small, just a small example of how they did it in New England.
Right.
And you go back to New England, and Moille is laid out on the same pattern with the village green, and everything started around it.
Yep.
Churches and schools and businesses. Well, now it's homes with
Sure.
mostly.
Right.
But you go back to Connecticut, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, they're New Englanders. So were these people. So were the Dover people. So were the Princeton people. They were all laid out the same way. With that, well, now in Princeton, it's the courthouse square. But and Princeton, as you know, was a church colony.
Yep.
As was Galesburg, as was Geneseo.
Mm-hmm.
A bunch of others. There's some I'm sure I don't even know about. But yeah, that's the thing about us, these little towns that are unique, you know.
Sure. Sure.
Each one. The only thing that bothers me about it is we've lost all of our local businesses that we had. We had so many things, and I hate that.
Yeah.
And so do a lot of other people.
Yeah.
But the population has increased.
Yeah.
But you have to go so far now to get what you need.
Yeah.
So
we talk about that a lot.
That's basically,
yeah,
where I've been coming from.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, it seems like several people have passed stories down to you that happened before your time.
Oh yeah.
And are there any favorite stories that happened before you came along?
Only the way they laid out the village.
Okay. All right.
Kendall and Reeve, when they came here, 1836. Now this part of the country, that's really a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they were still afraid of the Indians.
Okay.
After the Black Hawk War. And the countryside was still alive with wild animals and wolves. Yeah. And you went out at night, and I've heard this, that you went armed because of the wolves. They'd attack your horses and sometimes people.
Yeah.
And, well, little by little, they were cleaned out. I don't know if they put a bounty on them or what, but they had to do it.
Yep. Yep.
And, but the two original houses in town are still with us. Mm-hmm. You knew that one.
Yep.
Yeah.
One is Mike Silphy's.
That's the first one.
Now, yep, by the grade school.
And then, of course, the one on the corner at the Island Stool Crosswalk.
Okay.
Yeah, Joe Gott owns that now. But that was the second one.
So which was an inn, right?
It was. Yeah. One of these country crossroads inn. You could get sometimes a meal, sometimes not. It was a place to lay down for an evening.
Right.
Mr. Lincoln was one of their guests. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, he got around. He was all over the state of Illinois as a lawyer.
Sure.
But and some other places too. But yeah.
Any other well-known people you can think of that came through and left a little mark on the Moille?
Don't know how much of a mark they would have made.
Or maybe just came through then.
But my mother, when she was in high school, early 1930s, she said one of their guest speakers to their student body was Cordell Hull. That would be Franklin Roosevelt's Secretary of State.
Okay.
And how they happened to get him there, I have no idea. And Everett Dirksen was another one. Of course, he was senator from the state of Illinois. Graduations brought people in.
Yeah.
And Paul Simon was here twice.
Right.
Dean Madson's schoolmate.
Okay.
Yeah. And spoke to commencements. And yeah, there were some people like that. Used to be the Little Brown Church of the Air on WLS radio. And Dr. John Holland was their chaplain. And he'd speak every Sunday morning over WLS. Well, he was the speaker for Johnny Schwablin's graduation class when graduation time came.
Okay.
Yeah. But I'm sure there's a lot of towns that could have done the same thing. Yeah.
You mentioned at one point in time that Carrie Nation or Carrie A Nation came through. What do you remember about that story?
Just what my grandmother told me about her, and things that I've read about her.
Yeah.
Have you read about her?
A little bit, yep.
She was from Kansas.
Yep.
She had an alcoholic husband, which just left her just scarred from that.
Yep. Well, he died of alcohol, I believe.
Yeah.
Yep.
And she married David Nation, but she was a crusader in the cause of temperance.
Yep.
And I mean, she was a radical.
She was a wild gal.
She had a crew, and they'd go around the country speaking against alcohol.
Yep.
And which was really a good thing at that time, because there were so many battered wives, abandoned kids, and things like that.
Yeah.
It was a real serious problem.
She had some good reasons for this.
And but she and her crew would go into a saloon armed with hatchets and just tear the place apart. Billiard balls through the mirrors, bottles smashed everywhere.
Yeah.
And she was known all over the country for doing that.
Yeah.
And she spoke from the back of a train down here at the depot. And either just before that or just after, I'm not sure if she was heading into Mendota or out, they piled off the train in Mendota and broke up the saloon at Hotel Faber.
Okay.
The guys in Mendota told me about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she'd sell little souvenir hatchets along the way.
Yes, she did.
To keep her out of jail. They'd pay her bail so she could move on to the next town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was a big lady and a strong. Yeah. Yeah. So that was. That's one of the interesting things. My grandmother remembered that as a girl. Yeah.
Who was it? Your grandmother that also remembered Chief Shabana coming through town, or who was?
Marcia Graves. They lived where Galways lived.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And the Graveses were among the very first in town.
Yep.
And she, Marcia would be her great-grandmother, grandmother or great-grandmother, Lucy Kendall Graves. As a little girl went to school, there was a schoolhouse that stood over just across from where the water tower is now.
Okay.
Came noontime and she'd go home to lunch down the east side of town. The house is still there too. And she got to the corner of the Baptist church there to cross the street, and here comes this wagon down the street with an Indian. And his wife was sitting in the back. And she was panicked and screamed, you know, Indians, and she cried, and he stopped and he says, "Don't be afraid, little girl. My name is Shabana. I'm a friend of the white people." Well, he was, and of course his own people thought he was a traitor.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he was a Potawatomi. The girl was Potawatomi.
Okay.
He was of the Ottawa tribe.
Yeah.
And he had fought in the Battle of the Thames up in Wisconsin, the War of 1812.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, the British suffered a defeat in their Indian allies, and he swore he'd never fight the Americans again.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was at that corner is where that happened.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chief Shabana paid a heavy personal price in the name of keeping the peace.
Oh, he did. They murdered his son.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And he lived up at Shabana. Yeah. And then his land got sold out from under him. He was not kindly treated.
No. By either side.
Yeah.
By the natives or the people here.
Some did, of course, but there were those that didn't. And he's buried over at Morris. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And people bought property over there for it.
Yep.
And yeah. So yeah, Shabana.
So it seems like you've always been pretty proud of certain people that you know that came from Moille that went off and did some other bigger things with their lives that they couldn't have accomplished here in Moille.
Right. Wayne McCrae was one of those. We grew up, we used to bicycle together, swim together, get in trouble together, all of that. Well, he went into electrical engineering out of high school down at Bradley. And then he took a job with General Dynamics in California as a rocket technician. And they'd send him down to Cape Canaveral when they were sending up those first manned space devices. And he went to work later on for Martin Aircraft and designed the control panel for our first orbiting space device.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was one thing that he did, which is now on display at the museum down at Cape Canaveral. And what is there? Oh, the girl from Arlington, Pendergast's. Oh, come on, what's her first name? But she went to Lamoille High School. And she is now chief, what do they call them when they govern a museum? The name, the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
But she is head of the chief curator of Mount Vernon, Washington's home. And she was something else again. She was quite a, yeah. And Jim Carver, he graduated back in the 60s and went to teaching and coaching in Iowa. Ended up, he was Iowa's Coach of the Year. Yeah. And so there's two or three others that I can't remember right now. But
it's all right. Well, I guess I've only got one other question for you at the moment. And are there any last words you would like to leave broadly to the people of Lamoille and your community that you grew up with and other people that you've loved along the way? Is there anything that you'd like to say to them?
Well, get close with the Lord and don't forget your local community. uh, value your local history and keep your assets, your historical uh, assets, like your schools and your churches. We've got 3 buildings in town that are listed in the National Register of Historic Places. And of course, the Allen School is one, the Congregational Church another, and the house on the north side there where Dr. Lopez lives, National Register of Historic Places. And but to keep that and to value that, and you'll be carrying some of that on, I know. And by the way, that picture of the depot you gave me from the west, George has already drawn that in a big, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
He's such a talent.
Yeah, he took that up. Yeah, he's a talented guy. I couldn't believe, I can't draw a straight line, let alone do what he does. Anybody that's artistic and has that knack, you know. Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to pass along?
I mentioned Paul Simon. 1958 is the first time he was with us at commencement. With the horn-rimmed glasses and the bow tie and all that. He was a newspaper editor at that time from Troy, Illinois. After the commencement was over, Elizabeth Norris was one of the graduates. They had a party out there in that big house of theirs. And I was invited out, so after we locked up the building and everybody was gone and all that, I think I've told you I headed out there, and it was a full moonlight night. And I pulled in that yard in that big house. I always got to say it was lit from one end to the other, and people and cars everywhere. And I went in, and the candles were lighted in that big dining room table with the punch bowl and the cake and everything else. And at one end was Harold Steele and Paul Simon and Don Norris in animated conversation. And I looked back on that and I thought that was really something. Paul Simon became a United States Senator. Don Norris was school board, church boards, county board, University of Wisconsin, all of that stuff that he was, community minded. And Harold Steele was a member of 2 administrations, the Reagan and Bush administrations, Farm Credit Administration. He governed that in Washington. Then came home to Dover. He and Marjorie were gone for about 8 years most of the time. He came back without a very good opinion of Washington politics. I remember, he had things to say. Yeah, but I guess that's true wherever you go.
Sure.
Yeah. Like Mr. Lincoln said, there are very few people in politics that are not interested in interest other than the interest of their constituents. Unfortunately. Yeah. Yeah. But that evening out there at Norris's, I thought that was really something. Yeah.
Well, Neal, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to sit down with us and share some memories and thoughts about life, and it's been a real pleasure.
Well, thank you very much. I hope it serves your purpose.
Oh.